Good morning folks, 21st Century Caveman here. Hope everybody's well, hope everybody's happy. Welcome to another episode in the series, How to Make a Man Cave, She Shed, Workshop, Cabin in the Woods. Whatever label you apply, the process is exactly the same. So here you can see that I've measured some roofing felt to size, and I'm just sort of cutting it, making sure that I have what I believe to be a reasonable overlap on the edges. In retrospect, I would do it slightly different if I was to do it again. I would make sure that I wouldn't just work on the basis that I had, say for example, a couple of inches overlap. I would give myself several inches just to cover every eventuality, because I did make some mistakes cutting the felt, and that will become clear a little bit later on. So obviously you need a nice sharp blade, or several blades actually, to cut this stuff. The sun's come out today, so in keeping with the instructions on the felt, I've just decided to lay it out flat in the sunshine, just for it to, warm up and soften up a little bit to make it easier to lay. So this is the felt adhesive I'm using. I bought it from Screwfix, and there are lots of recommendations for this. Now I will make it clear that the felt I'm using is what's described as a super felt. I bought this from Wix. It's quite a bit more expensive than the cheaper stuff that you can find, but it has a sort of a guaranteed life of about 15 years compared with the cheaper stuff, which quite frankly is rubbish. It tears like rice paper. Right folks, so on the back here I've got an overlap of 120 millimeters, and that's consistent all along. And on the side elevation, if I can grab it, I've got, I think it's about 130. Yeah, it's about 130, look. So basically I can cut that down as I need to. So this is what we've got so far then. Right, so I'm happy with the overlap, so now in a position where I'm going to start nailing this felt into place. I'm using 20mm clout nails purchased from Screwfix, come in half kilo bags from memory, and the spacing on these is around about 3 inches. Now I've actually used hundreds of these things on this project, and I've only come across a couple of instances where the heads have been deformed, so I'd highly recommend these. Now on the instructions for the felt, it did suggest an overlap of, I can't remember whether it's 50mm or 75mm, but I decided to do a belt and braces job on this, and I went for a 100mm or 4-inch overlap, just to give me peace of mind really. So this is the adhesive I decided to use to stick down the overlaps, and I bought it from Screwfix on the back of dozens of very favourable reviews. Now there are different recommendations as to how to apply this stuff. I decided to try a very old stiff paintbrush and also these flexible filling knives, and it's fair to say that after trying both of these with an adhesive as thick and gloopy as this, I found the flexible filling knives to be the best basically. you know, if you have a paintbrush with very fine bristles on it, it's just not going to cut the mustard. It's just going to be too flimsy to apply this sort of very thick gloopy adhesive. And as you'll see in the next few shots, when I'm using the filling knives, it applies this stuff absolutely perfectly, and that would be my recommendation as to how to apply this stuff. I mean, look, that's just absolutely perfect, isn't it? Now this stuff is very, very messy indeed, and you need to make sure that any clothes you're wearing, you know, you're quite happy to chuck them after doing this, because when I actually finished this roof, the shirt and the trousers I was wearing, I just chucked them in the wheelie bin basically. There was no point whatsoever trying to keep these, they were just absolutely trashed. So you need to allow the adhesive to go tacky, and then you can start positioning the felt in place, and you do have a bit of time to, you know, manoeuvre the thing if you're not happy with it. I think one thing I would say though, one sort of tip having done this installation, is the fact that when you're applying the adhesive, don't go right up to the mark where you're going to do the overlap, because this stuff is very thick, and once you start compressing it, it might spill out over the edges. Right folks, now that I'm happy with the positioning of the felt, I can start nailing it into place and securing it. I'm using 20mm large head clout nails, and I'm spacing them sort of 50mm, 2 inches apart. It doesn't need to be precise, but you just need to make sure that the overlap is as secure as possible and a nice tight fit. Now this is what happens if you put too much of this adhesive too close to the edge of the overlap. Basically, as soon as you start trying to compress this, the thing will just splurge out and make a little bit of a mess like I've done here. So let's say for example you're working on the basis of 100mm overlap, then give it a good inch from the edge, so that when you actually compress the edges, it doesn't, you know, sort of just spurt out over the edges. Another thing I'll mention is the spacing on the nails here. Now you'll see that this section here, which is going to be covered by the a top layer of felt, the spacing on the nails is every 3 or 4 inches. You know, it doesn't need to be as close together as the overlap. And here's a good example of that look. Right guys, so disaster has struck us. I've cut the felt too short, so a bit of a bummer. So what I've decided to do is to cut it in half.
And then what I'm going to do, I'm going to run a strip down there. I'm going to put these two bits here, look, I'm going to fix them on top of that strip, and then I'm going to put another bit on top, another strip on top of that to cover the seam, as it were. So hopefully that'll be alright, I'm sure it will be. And that's what happens when you're not paying attention. But anyway, the main thing is I can resolve it, hopefully satisfactorily. So yeah, there we go. Lesson learned. Pay more attention when you're cutting stuff. And certainly the old adage, measure twice, cut once, does apply.
Right, folks, so a short while later then I continued filming, and full disclosure, I was really pissed off of myself for making such an elementary mistake in cutting these strips of felt that I lost heart, really, if I'm completely honest with you. So anyway, I went and had a cup of tea, calmed down a bit, decided to man up and continue filming. And the reason I've included this, and I'm being completely honest about this, is the fact that it's important to be honest about what's happened here, because despite being a very experienced DIYer, I do make mistakes, and it's important to disclose this. So anyway, look, there is some missing footage, and I decided, as I say, just to man up and just to sort of roll the camera again once I calmed down, basically. Now, the way in which I've actually decided to remedy this mistake might be a little bit convoluted, and I could have made it a bit simpler and saved a bit more time, but what's done is done, and I'm confident that the finished result will be very effective indeed, and keep the weather out. Now, at this stage I was actually coming to the end of the adhesive in the can, and because we've got quite a few joints here, I just basically decided to slap the stuff absolutely everywhere, just to make sure that every joint was sealed as thoroughly and effectively as possible. And I think this effort here would have done the job, basically. So as you can see, I'm slapping this stuff absolutely everywhere. No point in saving any. I won't be doing this sort of a job anytime soon. So I just wanted to make sure that there was no opportunity at all for the rain to get in once I completed this project. So as you can see, the way I decided to resolve this issue was to have some felt underneath, and then to cover all the joints with another strip going vertically, and then to seal it on all edges and nail it appropriately. And although, as I say, this was a bit of a convoluted way of doing it, I'm sure it will be very, very effective indeed. Now it may not be clear from the video, but after marking the edges of the felt, I did actually put adhesive down, so I'm not just sort of nailing this without any adhesive on the overlaps. As I say, this stuff has been slapped absolutely everywhere and should be completely and utterly waterproof.
Right, so virtually running out of battery. The end is nigh. I'm just going to roll back that piece of felt, tack it in place and we're done. Well, not tack it, nail it in place and we're done. I had a little bit of bitumen left, so I just thought, do you know what, just chuck everything on there. So hopefully we'll have a really good adhesion there. So anyway, I'm just going to, as I say, just finish this off now and time for a beer, I think. Right folks, so that's it for today then. When I come back tomorrow, I'll be charging up the edges. So basically I'm sick of the sight of the thing now. So yeah, need to pack up, need to get some tea, need to get a beer, but not necessarily in that order.
Right folks, I'm back out again on the following day, just cutting this felt down to size on the edges. And to anybody watching this video, I would really strongly recommend that when you're measuring the felt and cutting it to size, make sure you give yourself plenty of overlap. Make sure you give yourself enough margin for error in case you screw it up like I did. Now I think it's also fair to say that in nailing the edges of the felt I used far too many nails, and one of the issues I came against is the fact that because this felt is quite thick, it was quite difficult on a day like this. You know, it certainly wasn't a warm hot day to sort of try and bend it over the edges of the OSB boards. So I put far too many nails in here, to be honest with you, but you know, lesson learned. I certainly would be a lot more sparing with these if I had to do a project like this again. So in order to make sure that I didn't trim this back too far, I basically just used a spirit level, the edge of a spirit level, just marked the edge. So that gave me about sort of 20mm or so, and then just got a Stanley knife and just trimmed it to size a little bit further. Just give myself a little bit of overlap on the timber beams here, look. So after all that hard work and effort, this is what we ended up with, and I was more than happy with it. Thank you for watching.